Welcome to the Beyond the Call Sheet podcast series, where we interview creatives and hear their journey working in the creative arts.
My name's Ophelia Wynne. I am a photographer and a director.
Tell me about your early childhood inspirations and growing up with parents who are artists.
So when I really knew that I was into art and to photography was, both of my parents are artists. My dad's a painter, he's a watercolour painter, paints faces, paints landscapes. My mum's ceramicist, also a painter. So I was always surrounded by creativity. And I was just obsessively drawing faces when I was in my teens, So I always used to draw makeup and girls in dresses, and I was just obsessed with that. And then, when I was at school, really, I didn't like school at all. I left school at 14 and sort of didn't have any qualifications because I wanted to learn from life, really. So I think I kind of had, when I was growing up, a kind of sense of, I knew who I was, really, in a way. I was quite bolshy and, there was no way anyone was going to boss me about, especially my mother or my father. So I just left school and did my own thing. I started working in factories and doing different things, but I came round to knowing, I think when you've got parents who are artists as well, you kind of think, well, I don't want to go in their footsteps, So it took me a while to get around the knowledge of what I wanted to do.
What education did you pursue to become a photographer?
I moved down to London when I was 20. I wanted to work, but I knew I had some sort of yearning for something, yearning for creativity. So I did an evening course and to learn how to draw, and that gave me the capability to get onto an art foundation. And when I was on an art foundation, I learned how to black and white print in the darkroom, use a camera, and that's when I started to get hooked. And from there, I was like, because I left school at 14 and not 16 like the normal people do, or normal kids do, I was different. I didn't have qualifications, so I had to really prove myself. And so that proving was being in the darkroom, learning how to draw, putting a portfolio together. And the head of the Art Foundation said, well, you're not going to get in to do a degree. And I said, I'm going to do a degree. And he said, you're not going to be able to because you haven't got the qualifications. And I said, well, I'm going to get in on the merit of my portfolio. And he said, well, you can try. So I did. I tried, and I applied to Nottingham Trent University, which is more of like a fine art documentary approach to photography. And I got in on the merit of my photography. I was a bit of a sort of late developer. I was more 23, 24 when I went to university, so I was a bit older. But I kind of got in because they were accepting mature students anyway. And I got in on the merit of my portfolio. So that's when it started for me to go sort of more into looking into the depth of photography and the colour and exploring photography in a deeper way.
How was your experience at Trent University, and what did you learn during that time period?
While I was at Trent University, Nottingham Trent University, I think that was a place that gave me the time and space to really develop my style of work. I started to be able to look at photographers and really research what kind of photography I liked. It gave me the space. And when I came across photographers Martin Parr, I was like, wow, this is it. This is the kind of photography I want to do. I love the ad hoc kind of framing, a lamppost down the middle of the frame and flash and really garish colours and people looking a bit worse for wear. But actually, for me, it was like, wow, this is the kind of photography I want to do. So I kind of used that style of work from Martin Parr and used it for my own and development of how I wanted to be a photographer and my style of work. And I think it's really important when you're at university to learn where you're going in your sense of style, because when you get commissioned later on, you need to know, the art director or whoever's commissioning you needs to know what kind of style of work you are and what you work with. And I think that's very important. So when I left university, I knew straight away I wanted to go down to London to start working in photography. And I got the opportunity to work with Rankin. I was his producer for his Raw Nudes exhibition. So I was working with him for about 6 months, and it kind of gave me a really good insight into how photography worked and the industry. And I met so many amazing people, and I'm still friends with some of those people today. And it gave me an insight into photography. And then that's when I knew I kind of wanted to work in it, you know. It's quite hard sort of being a freelancer in some ways, but it was where I wanted to be. And I knew it was an exciting time to be there at that point. And working with Rankin was brilliant. I loved working with him.
What key skill sets did you learn whilst working with Rankin?
So when I worked with Rankin, I just started to really learn how to do lighting and work with people. And then I decided, right, this is it. I want to be a photographer. And then I started getting commissioned for the Back of the Face magazine. I was doing lots of club kids and sort of like doing back pages. And that's when I really started to develop my documentary style of shooting people, club kids, all around London. I was also commissioned to go to places like Russia, to Propaganda Club, and photograph all the, follow a couple of DJs there. And that's when I started to sort of like get all the kids there and, got some amazing shots in Propaganda Club. And then we flew to Irkutsk, which is near Lake Baikal. And I had to shoot in the club there as well. And basically, I remember that one point where I was photographing all the kids. I was obsessed, because it was like there's so much going on there. And it was so unusual to be in a different country as well. And I remember the owner of that club in Irkutsk basically tried to get my camera and smash it on the floor. And I was like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. And so he was really drunk. And so I had to get myself out of that situation. But that's when I started to really know that this is the kind of style of work I wanted to do. It was more documentary, social realism, using flash, a bit like the Martin Parr that I was describing. And that was where I think basically my career started, at the Back of the Face. When that happened, I started to get calls from places like Vogue, and I started to shoot like Adidas campaigns, and I was started to do a lot more commercial work, but I kept it in my style of work. And don't forget, at that point in time, I was shooting on negative film as well, so everything was with negative, and it was learning how to use the film and push and pull film and making the film stand out and more bouncy and poppy. And so that's where I really started to develop my sense of style.
How did you continue developing your style whilst working as a photographer?
From this experience of like getting to know what kind of photographer I want to be, then I was starting to get commissioned more because of my style of work. And in a way, I think that's really important to have that, so people know who you are as a photographer. You've got to have some sort of identity, And I was lucky to be able to push that and to sort of not conform to what other people wanted or art directors wanted. I think it's really, you've got to have your own voice in a way. And I think that's what makes people stand out, or photographers stand out nowadays, is like the sense of style. You can know a Martin Parr picture from anywhere, really, don't you? So I think for anyone who's wanting to be a photographer, I think it's really important to have that, your own sort of identity, your own vision, and your own eye.
What would you say are the main challenges of working as a freelance photographer?
Challenges can be, when you're a freelance photographer, is getting used to being freelance, because you're not working all the time. Sometimes you're working, sometimes you're not. When I was in the height of my photography career, I was like shooting 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes even 8 times a week. I was shooting in the day and then I was shooting in the night. And, there was no time to sit around. But sometimes you do have times where it's quiet. And, how do you get used to being quiet? And I think, that takes experience, that takes time. And I think really what happened with me is that's when I started to develop my own personal work. Because as a photographer, it's really important to have your own personal work to go with the commercial work. Because when you go to meet art directors or creative directors in advertising agencies, it's important to take your own personal work to show that, what you do behind the scenes. It's not just commercial. And it's important for me to be able to put commercial and to put personal work next to each other, so you can see that style of work again.
I'd love you to share some of your memorable moments whilst working as a photographer.
Some of my fond memories of being a photographer is working with people like Debbie Harry. Like, she was an idol of mine when I was, behind the bike sheds, listening to her music, and then getting the opportunity to photograph her. I was like, oh my God, this is just out of this world, So that's one of the biggest highlights of my life, really. And, you know, shooting things like Adidas campaigns and shooting campaigns and working with people and getting to personalize my work with people, because that's what photography is about, especially my kind of photography, is actually working with people and getting to know them and actually getting people to be themselves. I like to operate sometimes where people come to me when I'm actually on set. I get the people to come to me so they feel comfortable. So I just love working with people, and I just find it enriching and exciting and trying to get the best out of someone.
What are your thoughts on AI, and how do you think that will impact photography?
AI, you know, it was like the same time as when digital photography came out, around about 2008 for me. I was shooting obviously on analog at the time, and then digital photography came out, and it was almost like, oh, I don't really want to get into digital. I want to keep authentic, you know, with my work and what I'm about. And that took time to get used to doing digital and converting to digital. Now you've got AI, which is another sort of movement going on. Personally, at the moment, I'm really not into AI because I want to keep the authenticity of taking photos and looking and working with people. And I think AI takes all that away. I think it has its tools, which are really good for things like if I'm doing questions, or if I want to refine something, if I want to talk about something, or if I'm doing a film, I want to get some questions together. I think it's great to have a tool like that. But for images and making video, for me, it's not there. And also, when you look at photographers and the photographers' work, don't you want to know what's behind it? Don't you want to know what photographers shot that? It gives it more depth. It gives it more honesty. I think when you look at AI and you've got nothing behind it, you just go, move on.
What advice would you give to young creatives starting their journey?
So my advice to young creatives is really work out your sense of style, what kind of photographer you are. I think also realise there's lots of mistakes, happy mistakes, and to work through those mistakes and to keep it going. Just keep going, and the longevity of it, and you'll get there.
Thanks for watching or listening to Beyond the Call Sheet. I hope you found it interesting, and if you'd like to be notified of the next episode, then don't forget to subscribe or like. Thank you.